Hello, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series hosted by the National 911 Program. My name is Sherry, and I will be the moderator for today's session. It looks like we are having a little bit of technical difficulty. So there we go. Everyone should now be seeing the title slide and the bulleted information. The webinar series is designed to provide useful information for the 911 stakeholder community about federal and state participation in the planning, design, and implementation of next-generation 911 systems. It includes real experiences from leaders utilizing these processes throughout the country. Today's session will feature presenters discussing Kari's law requirements, new next-generation 911 resources, and 911 data. David Firth, Deputy Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau of Federal Communications Commission, will discuss the requirements for Kari's law and the BAUM Act, along with tips on how to prepare before the requirements take effect. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator of the National 911 Program, will provide an overview of the new resources developed by the National 911 Program. For more information on National 911 Program webinars, or to access archived recordings, or learn more about the National 911 Program, please visit 911.gov. Feedback or questions about the webinars can be sent to the National 911 team at mcp911.com. Next slide. If you are experiencing difficulty with the WebEx application, please call WebEx Technical Assistance at 1-866-229-3239 and select option 1. Please note that all participants' phone lines have been put in a listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. To ask questions of our presenters, feel free to take one of two actions. Using the WebEx chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, enter your question at any time during the presentation, and it will be entered into a queue. This feature is not visible while you have your screen in the expanded page view. Or if you'd like to ask a question live, use the raise hand feature to request your phone line be unmuted, and you will be called upon to ask your question. Everyone registered for this webinar will receive access to today's PowerPoint presentation and the webinar recording. With that, I'd like to ask Lori to please introduce Mr. David Firth.
Thanks, Sherry. One of the real joys of this job has been working with our next speaker. Since its inception, I believe, David Firth has been the Deputy Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission. And in that role, Mr. Firth not only has carried out those responsibilities, but frankly gone way above and beyond in terms of a commitment to 911. We couldn't have a stronger advocate for 911 issues in the federal government. So I really appreciate your sharing what's going on at the FCC. And Mr. Firth, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Lori. And I will say, for my own sake, that being able to work with you and the 911 professionals around the country is a real privilege and a real pleasure. And so I'm happy today to talk about the FCC's implementation of two statutes that were enacted in 2018 that both have a significant impact on the provision of 911, specifically by multi-line telephone systems. And I may, during the course of the presentation, refer to them by the shorthand acronym that most people know, which is MLTS, or I may refer to multi-line systems. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those definitions. The FCC in August adopted a comprehensive order, one of the longest orders that the Commission has, and most comprehensive orders the Commission has ever adopted on 911, that focused on the implementation of Kari's law and also on Ray Baum's Act. And so what I want to do, okay, I think we are already diving right into Kari's Law. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and spend a little bit of time walking through the provisions of the law and the FCC's order that implemented both laws. And then we will have time, I'm hopeful that we'll have about 10 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer listener questions. So starting with Kari's Law, as most of you know, Kari's Law was enacted in response to a tragedy. This was the tragic story of Kari Hunt. She was a woman in Texas who was attacked and killed in a hotel room in Texas in 2013. Her daughter was in the room at the time, and she tried to dial 911 from the room, but she could not get through because she didn't know that the hotel telephone system in that particular hotel required her to dial 9 first to get an outside line, even to dial 911. So she was never able to dial 911, and unfortunately, Kari Hunt was killed in that incident. Following that tragedy, Kari's father, Hank Hunt, worked with the chairman of the FCC, Chairman Pai, who was then a commissioner and has since become chairman, and many others, to require that multi-line telephone systems, which are common in hotels, in businesses, on campuses, to support what we call 911 direct dialing. And 911 direct dialing is quite simply the ability to dial 911, those 3 digits, without having to dial a prefix to reach an outside line. So a number of states, even before the federal government passed Kari's Law in 2018, a number of states passed their own versions of Kari's Law with direct dialing requirements. Texas was the first, and there are a number of states, and we'll come back to the relationship between the federal law and those state laws a little later in the presentation. In February 2018, coincident with the 50th anniversary of the first 911 call in the U.S., Congress passed a federal version of Kari's Law, which became part of the Communications Act, which is the Commission's governing statute. And as a result, Kari's Law becomes part of the Communications Act that the Commission is responsible for administering and for enforcing. And so in August, after a long rulemaking in which we put out proposals and then sought comment and then issued an order, the Commission adopted rules to implement the statute in August. And the FCC rules are not a requirement. The law is self-executing, but nonetheless, the Commission felt that it was important to have more detailed rules that would assist those that are covered by the law and those that are affected by the law in understanding its requirements and in complying with those requirements. So there are 2 key elements to Kari's Law and the new rules that implement it. The first of those is that multi-line telephone systems must provide direct dialing for 911 calls. And the second is that they must provide notification when the call is made, and we'll talk a little bit about what that notification consists of. But generally, what that means is that if an MLTS user dials 911, let's say from a hotel room, they need to be able to dial 911 directly without a prefix. That call then needs to go to the 911 call center. And at the same time that the call is made, the telephone system, the multi-line system, needs to provide a notification to a central location, such as a front desk or a security office, that the 911 call has been made. And the idea there is that when someone, for example, from a hotel room dials 911, there needs to be some awareness at the front desk or in a security office that the call has been made, because when first responders arrive, they're going to arrive in the hotel lobby or in some other main entrance of the hotel in order to get access to the room from which the call was derived. And so the people that are responsible for basically administering entry into the building and for security of the building need to know that the 911 call has been made. The Kari's Law had a compliance date of February 16th, 2020, which is 2 years after the law was enacted. So that is the date, this coming February 16th, that is the date that the statutory requirements of Kari's law will become effective. One other note before we start getting into the details is about the definition of MLTS, of multi-line telephone systems, under the law and under our rules. As I mentioned, MLTS, these are systems that are typically used in enterprise settings, such as hotels, offices, or campuses. And the FCC interprets the definition of MLTS in Kari's law to cover the full range of networked communication systems that serve enterprises. So even though the word telephone is in MLTS, multi-line telephone systems, the definition as it's been interpreted by the Commission includes IP-based and cloud-based systems. We also interpret the definition to include MLTS that allow users to make calls, outbound calls, even if they don't enable the calls, an outside caller to make a return call directly to the 911 caller. But it's important to understand the definition of MLTS because then that affects who is covered by the law and by our regulations. So let's move on to that. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So the direct dialing obligations of the rules apply to all of the entities that are in the chain of production or of use of a multi-line system, from the manufacturers to the installers to the entities that manage or operate the system. So for direct dialing, MLTS manufacturers, importers, sellers, and lessors must ensure that the system is pre-configured so that when it is properly installed, anyone using a phone equipped with dialing facilities will be able to call 911 directly without having to dial any additional prefix or code. So that's the law as it applies to those that manufacture, import, sell, or lease these systems. And in fact, MLTS manufacturers have been building MLTS systems for years that actually support direct dialing. Part of the reason for that is that there are already state laws, as I mentioned, that have been in effect in a number of states for some time that require 911 direct dialing. So the industry, the MLTS industry, has been building and designing and manufacturing multi-line systems that have that direct dialing capability for some time. So they're widely available in the marketplace. Were widely available in the marketplace even before the federal law was enacted. But once the federal law goes into effect, then this requirement will apply nationally, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So these are the obligations that apply to manufacturers, importers, sellers, and lessors. And let's go to the next slide, where we get to the obligations of MLTS installers, managers, and operators. So these are the entities which, in many instances, enterprises may contract with to install and operate systems. In some instances, the enterprise itself may operate the system, in which case it would be an operator. But the enterprise that uses the system is not necessarily an operator. It depends on how the system has been configured and who is actually responsible for operating it. But the obligations for installers and managers and operators more or less follow logically from the obligations that apply to manufacturers and importers and sellers and lessors. For the manufacturers, importers, sellers, and lessors, the obligation was to pre-configure the system so that it could support direct dialing to 911, so that the system, when it comes off the assembly line, although in fact most of these are now software-based systems, so there's no assembly line, but it needs to be configured or programmed to support direct dialing. And then it's the obligation of the installer, or the manager, and the operator to ensure that the system is actually configured so that the user can initiate a call to 911 directly without any prefix. So for the first group, it's a pre-configuration requirement, and then for the second group, it's a configuration requirement, so that the system is actually configured that when a person makes a 911 call without a prefix, that call will go through. So those are the fundamental direct dialing obligations under Kari's law, and they're really quite simple and straightforward. But I also then want to spend a little bit of time talking about the other element, which is the notification piece, because that is slightly more complex, but it's equally important. So let's go to the next slide. The notification obligation, unlike the direct dialing obligation, only applies to installers, managers, and operators. It does not apply to manufacturers or sellers. For central notification, installers, managers, and operators, again, have to configure the system to enable the provision of notification to a central location at the facility where the system is installed, or to another person or organization, regardless of location, if this can be done without an improvement to the hardware or the software of the system. So the idea here is that there may be many ways, depending on the configuration of the enterprise, the distribution of people, the physical facility that the enterprise is located in, and the nature of the MLTS system. There may be many ways to configure the system to provide notification. And the law and our rules do not specify a particular notification method. Instead, they provide flexibility so that if there is a central location, like as we talked about before in an earlier example, a hotel front desk, a security office, or perhaps a secure entrance to a building, it may be appropriate for the notification to go to that point. But there also may be systems that are used by a more widely distributed group of people, or where it might be important, even if the central location isn't manned outside of business hours, for the notification to go somewhere else. And there again, the law provides flexibility for it to go to some other person or organization regardless of location. So the notification to comply with this requirement can go off-site. And that's really up to the discretion of the enterprise and the installer, the manager, and the MLTS operator. Let me also just mention briefly the phrase improvement to the hardware or the software of the system, because again, this is a statutory provision that says that the notification requirement is in place if it can be done without an improvement to the hardware or software of the system. And we define that to include upgrades to core systems of the MLTS, as well as substantial software upgrades and any software upgrade requiring a significant purchase. So a very minor software change would not necessarily trigger this exception. But if providing central notification would require a significant upgrade to the core system, then notification is not required. And again, this is the way the law was constructed, so the FCC's rules track the law and provide for that exception. Let's go to the next slide. The content of the notification. The notification must include, at a minimum, the fact that a 911 call has been made, and a valid callback number, and information about the caller's location that the MLTS conveys to the PSAP with the call to 911. However, under our order, notification does not have to include a callback number or location information if it is technically infeasible to provide this information. We heard from some commenters that there might be situations where it would not be possible to provide that information. And so the rule provides for technical feasibility, and if it's not technically feasible, then this requirement does not require that location content. Let's go to the next slide. Another element of notification is the timing. Under the rules that the Commission adopted, the notification must be initiated at the same time as the 911 call, again, provided it's technically feasible. It must not delay the call to 911, and it must be sent to a location where someone is likely to see or hear it. Although it must be sent to a location where someone is likely to see or hear it, the destination point does not have to be continuously staffed or monitored. Notification also does not have to take any particular form, and businesses have the flexibility to select the form that best suits their needs. For example, notification could consist of an on-screen message with an audible alarm for example, a security desk. It could be a text message to a smartphone, or it could be an email. Again, the rules provide flexibility on that point. Let's go to the next slide. The scope of the requirements, and this is an important point, Kari's law as adopted and enacted into law is forward-looking. It applies only to MLTS that are manufactured, imported, offered for first sale or lease, first sold or leased, or installed after the February 16th, 2020 compliance date. Therefore, under the rules and under the statute and the FCC's rules implementing the statute, legacy MLTS, and that means a system that was manufactured, imported, first sold, or installed before February 16th, 2020, such systems are not subject to the federal requirements. And that means that there may be legacy systems out there that don't support direct 911 dialing. And this is an important thing for enterprise owners and consumers to be aware of. The Commission's rules do not require disclosures such as warning labels or stickers for legacy MLTS that are not subject to the requirements of Kari's law, but we strongly encourage enterprises to disclose any limitations on dialing 911 from legacy MLTS so that guests or workers who are unfamiliar with the system in a hotel, office, or other location are made aware of the requirements for dialing 911. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we talked a little bit before about state laws, and while the federal version of Kari's law is not retroactive, as I mentioned, many states have passed earlier state law versions of Kari's law. And this slide includes a map showing the states that have existing MLTS 911 laws and regulations. New York is also colored in red because they have MLTS legislation that is pending but has not yet been adopted. Note, however, that New York City has an ordinance that addresses MLTS 911 calling. The federal version of Kari's law expressly preserves all of these state MLTS laws where the exercise of state authority is not inconsistent with state law, and that's the phrase that the statute uses. And as a practical matter, what this means is that in states that have existing laws, covered MLTS entities may be subject to both state and federal requirements, and the state requirements may be more extensive. If parties have questions about the application of the federal law in combination with specific state laws, we encourage you to contact the relevant 911 program office for your state. And we've put a link at the bottom of this slide to the NASDA website, which has contact information for each state 911 program office. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to switch gears a little bit and then talk about BAUM's Act for the last portion of the presentation. Because in addition to Kari's law, Congress in 2018 enacted BAUM's Act, which includes a provision calling on the Commission to look broadly at improving 911 location for all communications platforms, and specifically at the feasibility of having dispatchable location conveyed to the 911 call center with each 911 call. So in August, as part of the same order that adopted the Kari's law rules, the Commission also adopted dispatchable location rules for multi-line telephone systems that are covered by Kari's law, as well as for other platforms such as fixed telephone service, interconnected VoIP, telecommunications relay services, and mobile texting services. But what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation is these requirements as they apply to MLTS. Let's go to the next slide. So dispatchable location is a term of art that has been in use now for a number of years and is in the statute. It's what first responders refer to as the gold standard of location information. And what it means is that in an office or an apartment building, it should include not only the street address of the caller, but other information such as the caller's floor level, room, office, or apartment number that is needed to adequately identify the caller's location. Let's go to the next slide. So for MLTS, what I've done here is to highlight the dispatchable location requirements for MLTS that were adopted by the Commission. And these requirements depend on the type of MLTS device or phone making the call. We distinguished between on-premises fixed devices, which is essentially a unit that's plugged into the wall, and these require automated dispatchable location. And what that means is that if the device is within a fixed property and under the operational control of a single administrative authority, if it connects to a single endpoint, such as a desk or an office phone, and it's not capable of being moved by the end user, then it's subject to these requirements. Non-fixed MLTS devices are devices that the end user can move from one endpoint to another without assistance. So it would be an office, might be a cordless office phone, for example, that you can move from one location to another. Automated dispatchable location means dispatchable location information associated with the MLTS device must be conveyed to the PSAP automatically when the user places a 911 call, without further action by the user at the time they place the call. For 911 calls from on-premises non-fixed devices, the rules require delivery of automated dispatchable location if it is technically feasible to do so. And if it's not technically feasible, the rules require either dispatchable location based on end user manual update or alternative location information. And alternative location information is information that may be coordinate based, such as the caller's X, Y, and Z coordinates. And it must be sufficient to identify the caller's civic address and approximate in-building location, including floor level in large buildings. With respect to off-premises devices, the rules are a little bit different. They require automated dispatchable location if it's technically feasible, and otherwise they require either dispatchable location based on a manual update or what we call enhanced location information, which is alternative information that may be coordinate based and must consist of the best available location that can be obtained from any available technology or combination of technologies at a reasonable cost. So the idea here was to make the rules flexible in cases where automated dispatchable location is not technically feasible. We did that because even if first responders don't know a caller's precise location in a building, knowing the approximate location, such as a floor level or a building quadrant, can save precious minutes when first responders are trying to get to the caller. Let's go to the final slide. This is the deadline. So this slide shows the compliance deadlines for the location requirements that were adopted by the Commission. Basically, the deadline for on-premises fixed MLTS devices is 1 year from the effective date of the new rules. The deadline for on-premises non-fixed devices and off-premises devices is 2 years from the effective date of the rules. These 1 and 2 year periods will run from the effective date of the Commission's rules, not from the February 16th, 2020 date. And this effective date will be set when the rules are published in the Federal Register, which we expect to happen very soon. And when it does, we will issue a public notice announcing the 1 and 2 year compliance dates. To help businesses and MLTS users and public safety entities prepare for these new rules, the Commission is conducting outreach, including conferences and webinars such as this one. We're also going to be adding new material to our website, such as updated consumer guides, timelines, and FAQs. And with that, that's the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions as time permits. And I understand that if we can't get to all the questions during the webinar, they'll be recorded so that we can address them later and make them part of the record of this presentation.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Firth. And with that, as David just noted, we will open up our Q&A portion. As a reminder, you can use the WebEx chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen to enter your question, or you can raise your hand. And we do have a couple of questions that came in during the presentation. The first question says, I would like to get a clear definition of the word notification as it relates to the notification that must be made to the front office area.
Well, as I said, the definition of notification, I would say it's a functional definition, and it really depends on the circumstances as to what an appropriate notification would be. We wanted to make we thought the law intended and that the rules should provide flexibility in terms of what would be the specific way in which notification would be most effective. And there are many, many different configurations of MLTS systems. There are large systems, there are small systems. They serve a lot of different type of environments. And so the idea is for the notification definition not to be too specific, but to be flexible. And the real issue is, does the notification effectively convey when a 911 call has been made from a user on the system? Does it convey to a central location or to a person off-site the fact that the call has been made and the essential information about that call? And it can be auditory, it can be a text, it can be a combination of those things. So it really depends on the circumstances.
Okay, so thanks. Our next question comes from Jerry Eisner. He's raised his hand. So Sheila, there we go. Jerry, I believe you're unmuted.
I just wanted to say thank you for David and ask if you have any more insight on when the rule might be published in the Federal Register.
I expect it will be happening quite soon. We don't have complete control over when the Federal Register publishes these rules, and one of the things that made it a little bit more complex in this case is that this order, as Jerry, I know you know, was an extremely long and comprehensive order where we were not only adopting rules that implemented the BAUM and Kari's law provisions, but we were actually overhauling and consolidating all of our 911 rules at the same time. So I expect that it will be in the Federal Register quite soon, but it will ultimately be up to the Federal Register Office to determine the specific publication date. And as I mentioned, when it is published, we will put out a public notice that will identify the publication date and also the effective dates, the deadlines that are generated as a result of that date.
Will that change the Feb 16, 2020 date potentially?
No, the February 2020 date for Kari's law is a statutory date. So the law that Congress passed and the President signed goes into effect on February 16th, 2020, regardless of anything the Commission does.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we also had Catherine with a raised hand. Catherine, I believe you've been unmuted.
Thank you. I've been running into problems finding companies that sell phone service that aren't loading all of the extensions into the ANI database, so that I continually get no record found issues for the same phone number because it's a hotel or maybe even a nursing home. Does Kari's law do anything to improve or require service providers to load these extra extension numbers for MLTS lines?
No, Kari's law doesn't go into that level of detail with respect to the operation of MLTS systems, aside from the provisions that I talked about. Certainly, if you have more specific issues about how it works, and are you looking at this from the enterprise side? I wanted to make sure I understood exactly what the issue was that you were raising.
Basically, just I'm working at it from the PSAP side and
okay.
trying to keep our records up to date, and I have very frequent reoffenders of this issue, and I just didn't know if there was some requirement that they had to load the extensions. I don't think there is.
Nothing in the federal law that affects that. If it's an issue that we could be helpful in assisting you or other PSAPs if they're having operational questions about those types of things, we're certainly happy to do that. But I don't think it's something that's directly implicated by the law.
Okay.
There might be state laws that have some impact on this, but that might not be relevant to your state.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And our next raised hand is from Bill Fox.
Yes, hello?
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Yes, similar to the previous question on the addressing location information, can you please clarify these two laws, the Kari's law and the BAUM's, with the indoor 911 or the next generation 911? text to 911 regulations? Are all these bundled into these two acts?
Well, one thing I think was noted on one of the slides, but I'm not sure I highlighted it, is that Kari's law only applies to multi-line telephone systems. The BAUM law applies to all platforms that support 911, but the Commission, when it considered adopting rules, did not include wireless 911 within the scope of the BAUM order. And the reason for that is that we already have rules for 911 location rules for wireless carriers. And in fact, we're in the process of updating those rules in a separate proceeding. So we did not include wireless 911 in the BAUM provision. But it does apply to VoIP, to relay services, to mobile text, and to MLTS.
Yeah, that's California's Office of Emergency Services has had a similar webinar in the last few weeks about their adoption of NG911. And again, the previous question about specific addresses inside hotels or suites in hospitals and all these different locations. We're just curious where the regulatory timelines are for each of those.
Right. Well, the other point I think I would make is that neither of these laws nor our regulations are specific to whether the system is a next-gen system or a legacy system on the PSAP side. So in fact, providers that are covered by these laws have to comply with them regardless of whether they are in a jurisdiction where 911 is still a legacy system versus a next-gen system. And the obligations will carry forward for any jurisdiction that transitions, that migrates from legacy 911 to next-generation 911. It might be that the specific mechanisms that are used to support these capabilities may be different, depending on whether it's a legacy system or a next-gen system. But both laws apply to both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I know we have a lot of other questions that have come in. We have several folks with raised hands. If you will submit your question via the chat function, we will capture them all, put them in a document, send them to our speakers, have them provide written responses, and those written responses will be posted with the recording of the webinar. So thank you again, Mr. Firth, for your presentation. And with that, our next speaker really needs no introduction. Lori Flaherty is the coordinator of the National 911 Program. And Lori, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks, Sherry. If you go to the next slide, please. For those of you that are not familiar with the National 911 Program, Congress gave us 3 jobs. The first is to act as a convener among all of the folks that actually operate the 911 system, whether you are at the local, state, national, federal, private, or public sector, to try and bring those folks together, you folks together, to decide for yourself how to move forward on specific issues. The second job is to collect and create resources for the folks at the state and local level that actually operate the 911 system. And the third job is to administer a grant program specifically for the benefit of 911. And we do that in conjunction with NTIA at the Department of Commerce. Really, all of that translates into 2 things. We provide 911 a federal home, if you will, and we promote and support 911 services at every opportunity. Next slide. The focus of this presentation really is to show you some of the resources, that second job, that have been developed within the last year. It's been a really busy year, so without further ado, if you go to the next slide, everything you'll be able to, I'm talking about, will be found on 911.gov, with the exception of this next thing that I'm talking about, because it is about to be posted. It is an online NG911 Readiness Checklist. Where did this come from? Well, it actually came out of the Task Force for Optimal PSAP Architecture, which was a formal advisory group to the FCC. And Working Group 2 of that, TFOPA, as we affectionately refer to it, came up with this NG911 Readiness Checklist. What is it? Well, it's a self-assessment tool for either PSAPs, local, regional, or state 911 agencies to assess where you are in the deployment of next generation 911 and to figure out, based on that, what tasks need to be accomplished next. I want to emphasize the fact that there is no data collection involved with this tool. It's purely for self-assessment. And what has happened that will be posted on 911.gov within the next couple of weeks is an online version, an electronic version, if you will, of that tool. It was completed by the 911 Working Group, which is a combined group of SAFECOM and the National Council for Statewide Interoperability Coordinators. They did an amazing job in terms of turning this into a readiness checklist that you can access and use for yourself. It really provides an objective assessment of deployment status, and one of the side benefits, I think, is that it provides consistent language to describe the functional elements of NG911. If we go to the next slide, I'll just share a little bit about how that tool is organized. It was adapted from a model that we used to develop a cost study for Congress on how much it's going to cost the nation to move to NG911. And it's divided up into 6 domains, and you can see them there. And it's very comprehensive. The middle 3 domains are, or the middle 4 domains really are the technical pieces. Domains 1 and 6 are purely non-technical, but it's very comprehensive in its approach to all the different functions that need to be present in order to move forward toward next generation 911. It further divides each one of those domains into 5 stages, and you can see the 5 stages there. If we go to the next slide, I believe the data domain has been broken out, and you can see for each one of the stages, for example, that first data element, geographic information systems, you can see how the group decided where each one of these functions falls in terms of the different stages. So if you move to the next slide, what you will find when you go to 911.gov is basically a spreadsheet. But it is a spreadsheet that has rollover definitions. It has drop-down menus. You can see there are instructions, there are element descriptions, there are acronyms. Where that little red arrow is in the corner of that first column is a hover over where definitions will be provided. Where that little green triangle is in the last column is really, if you hover over that, you get the drop-down menu. And what you will end up with is a PDF that shows you exactly for each one of those 6 domains where you are and specifically what things need to be accomplished to move on to the next phase. We're really excited about this tool, and we'll make sure that we announce it again when it is posted on 911.gov. Next slide. One of the other things that we heard from you is that in really developing advocacy among first responders, that tools to do that would be helpful to you. So what you're seeing here are a suite of publications that were developed with that in mind. Each one of these are directed toward a specific discipline, being EMS, fire, and law enforcement, and each one of them describes in specifically non-technical terms what the benefits of next generation 911 will be for them. They were authored by EMS, Fire, and Law for EMS, Fire, and Law, and we have worked extensively with groups like IACP, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and the National Association of EMS Officials, not only to develop the content, but to promote these publications among their constituents. If you move to the next slide, what we found out when we published these is that folks were actually, doing screenshots of the graphics that are included in these publications, and so we have provided them for your use. You can see here, if you go to NG911 Resources for Public Safety on 911.gov, you'll not only see these dedicated publications, there are articles and infographics and the PowerPoints. And there is also a 3-minute video that explains, again, in completely non-technical terms, what the benefits of next generation 911 would be for that specific discipline. One of the good things about working with the federal government is that we don't copyright anything. So it is there for your use. Please take it, run with it. If you move to the next slide, I just thought I would share with you one of the examples of one of the graphics. We know that there's a lot of confusion out there with regard to FirstNet and Next Generation 911. You know, I've heard before people say, well, we're doing FirstNet, we're done. Well, we all know that that's not the case. So that publication, NG911 and FirstNet, not only describes how the two are essential elements of the emergency communications ecosystem, but how they are distinct. And the publication also includes, as you can see here, graphics that are available for your use if you're trying to explain that to folks in your jurisdiction. Next slide. So moving back to the available resources, I just wanted to highlight one in that lower left-hand corner of this slide is the standards review document. For the last 6 or 7 years, the National 911 program has provided to the community a compendium of all of the standards that have anything to do with Next Generation 911. We found when we got into the space that there were, I don't know, 8, maybe 10 standards development organizations that all were developing standards that touched Next Generation 911, and frankly, no one was keeping track. So this document is updated annually. The information is vetted with those SDOs. They seem to be very pleased that someone is keeping track, and it is there for your use. We're about to publish this year's version. We update it every year, and the document has also been adopted by the SAFECOM program for its grant program. So anyone using those funds for 911 projects are required to comply with the standards in this document. Next slide. A couple of things I just wanted to mention to you. Again, from TFOPA, one of the recommendations from that advisory group was to consider uniform data for 911. That's a wonderful concept, but huge, frankly, in its purview. And so we did an RFI. We got a very positive response. And on the basis of that, we put together what you see here, a strategic plan for 911 data and information sharing. This document is really a framework for if we did this, what would it look like? Who would need to be involved? What kinds of things would we need to be concerned about moving forward? And we have a project going right now where a group of both public and private sector folks from the 911 community are deciding which bite of that elephant to take first. So we'll keep you updated as that moves along. The other document is the NG911 Roadmap. And frankly, that document includes a list of all the technical and non-technical things that need to happen at the national level, small n, if we're really going to tie together a seamless system of systems in this country. We will be the keeper of that list. We're in the process of doing a gap analysis to help us understand who is already doing what. We will continue to promote the tasks within that roadmap and provide that information to you on an ongoing basis. Next slide. The next thing that I wanted to tell you about is a product that came out of the National Academies of Science. And they did a huge report several years ago on the survivability of cardiac arrest. And one of the things they did was they made 2 specific recommendations to NHTSA, which is the agency that I work for. One for us to promote high-performance CPR and another to promote dispatcher-assisted CPR. So on the basis of that, we undertook this project, which we're calling CPR Lifelinks. And frankly, we started out with two separate projects, but very quickly put them together. If you could go to the next slide, please. It is really an effort to address the issue that all of us are familiar with in terms of the very low survival rates of cardiac arrest. And you can see the numbers there. I'll go ahead to the next slide, please. So these are the recommendations that were made by the National Academies, as I mentioned before, for dispatch-assisted CPR, what they're referring to as telephone CPR, telecommunicator-assisted CPR, as well as high-performance CPR. And it made sense to put them together because how do you tell someone to do high-performance CPR if you've never done it before? So this program really hopes to meld the efforts of EMS and 911 as they move forward together to try and address this issue. Next slide. So what you will find if you go to 911.gov and do a search for CPR lifelinks is a list of things. It is really an implementation toolkit for EMS and 911 agencies working together to implement programs to improve cardiac arrest survival. And I think if you go to the next slide, you will see the list of things that are available. There's a toolkit, there are training materials for your agency, there are case studies, there are a couple of videos there as well. One that describes a program in Bend, Oregon, where they have been doing this program for a number of years and have been very successful. There's another video there that describes basically what the program is all about. So if you're trying to garner support for that issue in your jurisdiction, this is one of the tools that is there for you. Next slide. One of the things that I wanted to mention to you is a publication that we did in conjunction with Google and Apple. This is sort of a fun project where we brought together, again, folks from the public as well as the private sector to come up with best practices for the use of what we're referring to as supplemental 911 location data, the data that comes from the device itself. It is divided into two parts, and you can see the two parts there, the best practices for the location providers and companies that are interested in relaying that information to PSAPs as well as PSAPs. It's all there for you in one publication so that you understand what to expect of each other. And we know that a lot of PSAPs have moved forward with this concept, but again, it is there for your use. Next slide. So those are the resources that are available on 911.gov. I just wanted to mention a couple of other things that are there for you in terms of resources. So next slide. For those of you that are familiar with the grant program, I'm not going to talk about that today, but for those of you that are interested in other forms of federal funding for 911, we have on 911.gov a list of all of the federal grant and funding opportunities for which 911 is an eligible use of funds. We know that you spend hours just trying to figure out who actually has funding available, and we have worked with our partners at DHS to compile this list. It is updated annually, and it is there for your use. Next slide. One other thing that I wanted to make you aware of is something we're calling the Interstate Playbook. For those of you whose systems are at a stage where you are beginning to think about how you're going to interconnect with local jurisdictions or other states, we have 4 states in the upper Midwest, North and South Dakota, Iowa, and Minnesota that are working together on those issues. And you can see what they have been working on so far. Chapter 1, you can see they were doing test calls among interconnected states. They really worked out the mechanics of exactly how would you set up an interstate agreement. And you can see Chapter 2 there, they're working on, they also worked on several new issues. They're on to Chapter 3 now, and we will certainly let you know as they move forward with their continued progress. They've been very interesting to watch in terms of how they have chosen to work together, and I know that a lot of the issues that they have identified not only apply in terms of local interjurisdictional issues, but interstate as well as, at the national level, how we're going to tie this all together. Next slide. I also wanted to mention to you that every year, in conjunction with NASNA, the National 911 Program, collects data from the states with regard to a couple of general topics. The National 911 Profile Database is divided up into 2 parts. The first part is basically demographic information, like how many PSAPs do you have, how many calls do you take, that kind of information. And the second part is divided up into where they are in terms of their transition to next generation 911. I wanted to mention this to you because we're about to publish this year's version, these data that were collected in 2018. And they include a variety of forms of information that may be extremely useful to you whether you're at the local, state, or national level in terms of getting a picture of where the United States is or where your state is compared to neighboring states with regard to a variety of issues. And if you move to the next slide, I'll just give you one example of a new data element that we are collecting information on this year. We have been able to move to increasing levels of detail with these data over time. We have worked closely with NASNA to revise the data to stop collecting specific data elements and add others. And this is one of the new ones for this year. It's not a huge surprise to anyone that most of the PSAPs in this country are small, very small. But again, if you're looking for information that validates, confirms your suspicions with regard to how your system compares to others, it is broken down by state, and we hope to have this published by the end of the calendar year. Next slide. So that is it for me. Again, everything with the exception of the updated versions and that NG911 assessment checklist are available for you on 911.gov. My contact information is there. If you have questions or if you require any additional information, we'd be happy to provide that for you. And I believe that's it for me.
Thank you, Larry. We do have a couple of minutes left here before we run out of time today. Our first question we have for you: what future programs or projects does the National 911 program see on the horizon?
Well, I guess I would ask the same question of the audience, and we have some ideas about some of the things that probably make sense to undertake. We're looking at that NG911 Roadmap to see which tasks in that national view would make sense for the program to take up. We're continuing to work on that data, that idea of uniform data for 911, which is an enormous undertaking, and sort of what would make sense for us to do. So those, in general terms, are the things that we're thinking about. But final decisions on that have not been made.
Thank you. What is the most pressing 911 issue facing local and state jurisdictions?
Well, what I hear from local and state jurisdictions is that there are generally two things that impede their progress. First is governance issues, related to who does what because of the ever-expanding role of 911 and the coordination and collaboration that is currently really necessary that was not in the legacy system, and how that's going to work. And the second, of course, is funding. Because, in order to pull off a lot of the activities that 911 undertakes, the resources need to be there. I would say those two things come up more than anything else.
Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers today. This will conclude today's webinar. We appreciate everyone's participation. An archived version of today's webinar will be available on 911.gov soon. The next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, January 14th at 12 noon Eastern Time. A list of all the 2020 webinar dates is provided in the slide deck, and a link to register will be added prior to the slides being made available via 911.gov. We hope you will be able to join us. Thank you and have a great day.